No lie was ever strong enough to break her, until an entire town agreed to believe one. For 3 hours she stood in the July heat of Stone Falls, Kansas, wrists bound behind an 8-foot post. One black word painted above her head: liar. 30 people crossed the street to avoid her eyes, and not one of them stopped. Yet behind those eyes she was counting, memorizing faces, guarding a ledger written in a shorthand no soul in the county could read. What did a cleaning woman know? That a judge would shame her in public to bury. She had learned to read the world, without sentiment from her mother, gone now, who left her a child caught between two worlds. And before that drought broke, everything Stone Falls believed about itself would be stripped away in the open square. Have you ever watched something wrong happen, right in front of you, and kept walking? Most people have. This is a story about the one morning a man decided not to. Stone Falls, Kansas. July 1886. The drought had been going 6 weeks. 6 weeks without rain, without relief, without even the pretense that relief was coming. The creek south of town, the one old-timers had called Cold Creek for 30 years, was a ditch now. Brown and still, and the particular kind of still that makes you uncomfortable if you look at it too long. Like something that used to move has forgotten how, and has stopped being embarrassed about forgetting. The cattle on the north ranches stood in their fields, with their ribs beginning to show through their hides. The corn on the east road had gone the color of old paper. Not yellow, old paper, the specific shade of something that was once useful and has been sitting in a drawer too long. 3 farming families had already sold what they could and moved on quietly without ceremony. The way people leave a place when leaving feels like failure and staying feels like slower failure, and there is no version of the story that ends well, so you just pick the one that ends soonest. This was Stone Falls in the summer of 1886. Hot, dry, indebted, and controlled, with a precision that most people in the territory would not have recognized as control because it didn't look like control. It looked like the natural order of things. It looked like how a town works when one man happens to hold most of the cards. That man was Judge Aldous Crane. Crane had come to Stone Falls 4 years earlier, with 2 things a failing county would have given a great deal for: legal training and access to capital. He was 57, medium height, gray at the temples, eyes the color of old pewter, not warm, not cold, but with the specific neutrality of metal that reflects whatever light is pointed at it, without contributing any of its own. He had arrived in the spring of 1882, when the county was genuinely collapsing. Farms going under, families leaving, land records a mess accumulated over a decade of insufficient administration. Nobody quite knew who owed what to whom, and the uncertainty was making everything worse. Crane had looked at this situation and seen, correctly, that it was a problem that could be solved with proper legal organization and access to money. He had proposed consolidated mortgages, centralized credit, standardized debt terms. The county had been grateful. That was the part Crane himself still thought about sometimes, in the closed office behind the courthouse, where the good lamps ran on imported oil, and the ledgers lived behind a locked door. He had been genuinely useful at the beginning. The first year had been almost entirely honest. The first time he changed a number, one small adjustment, one fee that hadn't been agreed to, but seemed reasonable given the circumstances, it had felt like pragmatism. Like the kind of small flexibility that keeps a system running when the alternative is rigidity that helps nobody. He had not known then how easy the second adjustment would be. He had not known how each one, after that, would require less justification than the one before. He had not known there was a specific point, a line he would cross without recognizing it, after which he was no longer a good man making occasional compromises, but something else entirely. Something that wore the same face and used the same voice, but had different math running underneath. By July of 1886, Crane held the mortgage on 22 of the 31 properties in Stone Falls. He controlled the food credit extended through Fox General Store. He had written the debt terms for 6 of the 7 farming families on the North Road, and he had been adding small unexplained fees to the accounts of 9 families for the better part of 2 years. Not large fees, Never large enough to be dramatic. Just enough. An administrative processing charge here. A drought assessment there. A late payment penalty on a payment that had in fact been made early. Just enough to make the next payment difficult. And the one after that. And then you lost the thing you were trying to protect anyway, just slower, with more suffering distributed across a longer period of time, so that by the end you weren't even sure where to direct the anger because it had taken so long to arrive. That was the system. It was elegant the way cruelty is always elegant, when it has had time to practice. And the most important part of it wasn't in any ledger. The most important part was in the heads of every person in Stonefalls who had something to lose. They made the calculations themselves. Fast, quiet, without anyone telling them to. They looked at what Crane was holding over them and they looked at what was being asked. Just keep walking, just look away, just find something else to be interested in on this particular morning. And they chose every single day to do exactly that. The system required almost no maintenance at all. The post stood in the center of the square. 8 feet tall, sunk deep into the packed earth, directly across from the courthouse steps, where Judge Crane could see it from his office window if he cared to look. He had looked once when they first tied her there. Then he had gone back to his desk. The sign above her head had been painted the night before in his office with his brush, his paint, his decision about the letter size. Big enough to read from the road. One word, in black. Liar. Her name, the name her mother had given her, in the Apache tongue her father had spent years trying to learn, and never quite managed, translated to something like the way a hawk moves against wind. Not fighting it. Reading it. Using it. In Stonefalls, people called her Kaya. She was 27 years old. Tall, taller than most men in the county, with the particular straight-backed posture of someone who had learned early that the world makes assumptions about tall women and has spent years declining to confirm them. Dark hair that had been pinned up properly, that morning before Crane's men came to her room at the boarding house, before dawn, before the pins had time to hold against what the day had planned for them. A dress that had been pale yellow once, a long time ago, before 3 hours of July sun developed opinions about the color. Her wrists were tied behind the post. The rope was the rough kind, the kind that doesn't negotiate with skin. Her mother had been Apache. Her father had been a Scots-Irish trader who had come through the territory when her mother's band was moving south and who had stayed because her mother was the most practical person he had ever met. And he had understood within 3 days of meeting her that this was the rarest quality in the world. He died when Kaya was 12. Fever. Fast. Her mother lived 8 more years. Long enough to teach Kaya everything she knew about reading a situation, with precision rather than sentiment. With the understanding that what matters is not what you feel about the air currents, but where they will take you if you use them correctly. Kaya had grown up between 2 worlds in the way that means you belong fully to neither, which means you learn, out of necessity rather than choice, to read both. She had learned to read numbers the way other people learn to read faces. Her father's account books were her first teachers. Then 3 years as a ledger clerk at a land office in Missouri, where she had been paid less than her male counterparts and given half their authority and twice their work, and where she had spent those 3 years learning the specific difference between a legitimate land transfer and a forged one, down to the language patterns that betrayed each. When the Missouri land office let her go, her employer explaining that his clients found it unsettling to have a woman managing their financial records, that it undermined confidence in the process, she had gone home that evening and sat in her room for a long time. Then she had thought, all right, if the process doesn't want me, I will learn the process well enough that someday it will need me whether it wants to or not. 3 years after that, she was in Stonefalls, working as a cleaning woman in the offices of Judge Aldous Crane, because it paid 50 cents more per week than anything else available to a woman, without a male sponsor in a drought county in 1886. And then, 3 weeks before the morning of the post, she had been cleaning Crane's private office on a Wednesday, and she had opened the wrong drawer. The drawer was the 3rd one down on the right side of Crane's desk. She had been reaching for the 2nd, where he kept the supply receipts she was supposed to organize, and her hand had gone 1 drawer too low. A land deed. She pulled it out far enough to read the date. February 1886. Property transfer. The Henderson parcel on the East Road, transferred to a holding company she didn't recognize, 3 words, and a number, the kind of name designed to be unmemorable to the people being displaced by it. She read the signature line, Thomas Whitfield. Kaya set the document down on the desk surface. She had cataloged the Stone Falls cemetery records the previous October. It had been a week's work, cross-referencing weathered stones against the county death log, filling gaps where the markers had become unreadable. She had done it carefully, the way she did everything, because careful was the only way she knew how to work. Thomas Whitfield, eastern section, third row from the fence. Gravestone with a crack running down the left side. Died October 1883. His signature, on a document dated February 1886. She stood at Crane's desk for 23 seconds. She counted them. Then she closed the drawer, returned to the shelf she had been dusting, and continued working. She finished the office. She collected her supplies. She walked down the courthouse steps at her normal pace and turned north toward the boarding house. She did not tell anyone. Not that evening. Not the next day. She went back to the office the following Wednesday and found 2 more documents in the same drawer. She had known they would be there, because a single forged deed is a mistake, and Crane was not a man who made single mistakes. She read them both in the time it took for the footsteps she could hear at the end of the hallway to cross 3 offices, and reach the 4th. The Aldridge parcel on the North Road, the Pruitt family land near the creek. She closed the drawer at the exact moment she heard the 5th office door open. Rupert Crane came in 30 seconds later, his silver watch chain catching the light from the south window. He stopped when he saw her. Something in his face rearranged itself, too quickly, too smoothly, into the pleasant expression of a man who had been surprised and didn't want you to know it. She gave him nothing. She collected her cleaning supplies and left. 48 hours after that, there were 2 men from Crane's office at the door of her boarding house, before the sun was fully over the horizon, with a written complaint bearing the judge's signature, and the specific certainty of people who have done this before and expect it to go a particular way. It went the way Crane expected, because in Stone Falls in the summer of 1886, the things that Crane expected tended to happen exactly as expected. The square was doing its morning business. Gideon Falk, who owned the general store on the east corner, had crossed to the far side of the street before he was anywhere near the post. Early enough to look accidental. Kaya noted the angle of his walk, the way he didn't quite look back, which was different from not looking back. Not looking back required nothing except momentum. Looking back would have required a decision. Reverend Hollis walked past on the courthouse side, eyes on the ground, which was, Kaya thought, the most honest response she had seen all morning. At least he knew he was doing something wrong. At least he had the self-awareness to be uncomfortable about it. There was something almost decent in the ground looking. It was the body telling the truth when the person had decided not to. The Aldridge family passed, husband, wife, 3 children. Ruth Aldridge took the long route around the block. Martin Aldridge held the youngest child's hand a little tighter than necessary as they came level with the post. The child, who was perhaps 4 years old and had no understanding of what the post was or who was tied to it, looked at Kaya with the direct, uncomplicated curiosity of someone who has not yet learned that looking is something to be managed. Kaya looked back at the child. Martin's hand tightened further and they moved on. Nobody stopped. That was the agreement. Nothing signed, nothing spoken, nothing that could be pointed to later and called a decision. That was the particular genius of what Crane had built over 4 years in Stone Falls. You didn't need to threaten people individually. You didn't need to visit their homes in the night. You just needed to hold their mortgages, control their credit, write the debt terms for the farming families. And then you waited. Because people with something to lose, with land and children, and a business they had spent their savings building, those people make calculations fast and quiet without anyone telling them to. They look at what you're holding over them and they look at what's being asked and they walk. Every time. Kaya stood at the post and memorized faces and made her own calculations. She had $12 in her room at the boarding house, sewn into the lining of a winter coat she hadn't needed since March. She had a set of account records she had been keeping privately for the 3 months she'd worked in Crane's offices. Her own ledger, separate from the official ones, written in a shorthand nobody else in Stonefalls would recognize. She did not know what was going to happen today. She did not know if anyone would stop. She did not know how long the sentence would run, or what came after it. What she knew was this. The signature on the Henderson deed belonged to a man buried in the eastern section of the Stonefalls Cemetery. She knew that what she had found in that drawer was not one forged document. It was the visible corner of a system, and she knew with the precise certainty of someone who has spent years learning how false entries make their unavoidable mistakes, that a system like that leaves traces in places its architect doesn't think to look. She breathed carefully, memorized faces, and waited, because that was what she could do right now, and because she had not yet given up on the possibility of one person, just one, deciding to be decent. Rupert Crane appeared at 9 o'clock, which told her he'd had a proper breakfast and taken his time with it. He crossed the street with a tin cup of coffee and the unhurried ease of a man who has never been required to hurry by anything outside his own preferences. He was 29. Wide shoulders, the silver watch chain catching the morning light with its cheerful, offensive persistence. He stood 10 feet from the post, looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved, and is now simply waiting for to conclude itself on schedule. His opening, morning, conversational, as though they had run into each other by chance at the market. Kaya looked at him, just that. No words. His smile moved, just slightly. He covered the movement with a sip of coffee, but she had already seen it. She was a woman who had spent 3 years in a Missouri land office reading documents designed to obscure what they were actually saying, and she had learned to read the smaller language underneath the larger one, the language of small movements, small adjustments, the tells that happened below the level of deliberate presentation. Rupert Crane was not as comfortable as he was pretending to be. That was useful. His voice took on the slightly lower register of a man trying to make something feel like a private conversation between two people who understand each other. You should have taken the offer. It was fair. Generous, actually, given what you were claiming. Kaya's voice came back level and clear. There was no offer. There was money I was told to take, and a story I was told to stop telling. Those are different things. You were cleaning offices. I was a ledger clerk in Missouri for 3 years, before I ever touched a mop. No heat in it. Just fact, laid down the way you lay down a document you want examined. I know what a legitimate land transfer looks like. I know what a forged one looks like. And I know that the signature on the Henderson deed belongs to a man named Thomas Whitfield, who died in the fall of 1883. Rupert's jaw tightened. A fraction. Enough. Thomas Whitfield is a common enough name. Thomas Whitfield of this county. She held his eyes. Buried in the Stonefalls Cemetery, eastern section, 3rd row from the fence. The gravestone has a crack running down the left side. I helped catalog those records last October. I know exactly where he is. Which means I know exactly what it means that his signature appears on a document dated February of this year. The pleasant expression held, but the edges of it had gone thin, the way paper goes thin when it has been handled too many times in the same places. Still intact on the surface, but you could see through it if you knew where to look. His voice dropped further. You're going to stand here until you reconsider your position. The longer you wait, the less there is to reconsider toward. That's just the math of it. Kaya turned her face toward the north road. Not in defeat, not in avoidance. Toward something only she could see, from where she was standing, a fixed point, held the way you hold a specific thought in a loud room. Deliberately, because if you let go of it, the noise takes over. She had nothing left to say to Rupert Crane. He was not the architect of this. He was the instrument. Useful. Compliant. Not particularly complicated. She understood this the way she understood a forged signature. Not with anger, with the clarity of recognition. The real problem was behind the courthouse window, and she was not going to spend what energy she had left on the instrument when she needed to be thinking about the architect. Rupert stood at the post for another few minutes, waiting for a response that wasn't coming. This bothered him more than he would have admitted. He was accustomed to compliance, through consequence, stated or implied, delivered with the pleasant surface that made consequences seem almost reasonable. Kaya was not responding to this language. She was not begging. She was not angry. She was not negotiating or looking for an exit. She was standing there looking at the North Road, as though he had already left, and she was waiting for something more interesting to arrive. He finished his coffee, looked at her once more, then turned and walked back across the street, his watch chain catching the sun, his expression still pleasant, his hands not quite steady around the empty tin cup. He did not notice this last detail. Kaya did. She filed it. The morning continued. The heat increased. By 10 o'clock, the packed earth of the main street was radiating warmth upward in invisible waves. By 10:30, most of Stonefalls had retreated into whatever shade was available. Storefronts, covered boardwalks, the slightly cooler interior of Fox store, where a hand fan moved warm air around in small circles behind the counter, and changed nothing except the direction of the discomfort. The women who had been watching from the boardwalk across the street had thinned to 2, then 1, then none. Sheriff Devlin Marsh remained on the courthouse steps alone, 43 years old, one hand on his belt, looking at the post, then at the road, then at the post again, with the expression of a man engaged in a sustained internal argument with himself and not entirely sure which side was winning. Marsh had come to Stonefalls before Crane had. Before the system existed. He had been elected sheriff on his own merits in 1880, in an election nobody contested, because everyone in the county knew he was the right man for it. He had been a good sheriff once. Careful. Fair. The kind of man who understood that the law is not the same thing as what's legal and who tried to honor the distinction. He had known, somewhere in the spring of 1883, that things were beginning to go wrong. He had told himself it was complicated, that Crane was doing more good than harm overall, that the county needed the stability, that one man's ability to see the whole picture was worth a certain amount of flexibility in how the details were managed. He had told himself this story many times since. It was wearing thin. Kaya could see this from 20 feet away. She added it to what she was assembling, not with hope because hope was too soft a tool for this kind of work, with the precise, unsentimental attention of someone doing inventory. What do we have? What do we need? What is the distance between those two things? And then the sound came from the north end of the main street. Hooves on packed earth. One horse, moving at the pace of a man who has somewhere to be and would rather be there already. Jesse Cord had not planned to be in Stonefalls that Tuesday. He had a fence line on the south pasture that had been needing attention for 2 weeks, 2 calves that required checking, a water trough on the east side of Iron Creek that had developed a leak he hadn't located yet, roughly 9 hours of work standing between him and a meal. None of it was going to wait politely while he took a social ride into town, but he had run out of wound salve. You cannot manage livestock injuries without wound salve. He had learned this the hard way twice, so here he was, 32 years old, 6 feet of weather-worn cattleman on a gray horse named Button, because his wife Clara had named that horse and Clara had a sense of humor that had not consulted him, and he had never changed the name after she died because changing it felt like one change too many in a period that had already required more than his share. Clara had been gone 2 years. Fever. February 1884. 3 days from the first symptom to the end, fast in the way that certain things are fast, with a velocity that leaves you standing in a house that still smells like cedar and wood smoke, holding a coffee cup you poured for 2 people out of habit, understanding for the first time that the rest of this is going to be different in a way you don't yet have the vocabulary for. He had not found the vocabulary yet. He functioned. The ranch ran. The cattle were fed. The fences were mostly repaired, and the accounts were kept current. But there is a difference between functioning and living, and Jesse Cord had known this difference for 2 years, and had not found his way across it. He came to Stonefalls only when the ranch absolutely required it. Salt, wire, medication for the animals. He bought what he needed, said as few words as the transaction permitted, and rode back north, before the afternoon heat made the return trip miserable. That was the plan. He turned Button onto the main street at 9:30, and saw the post. He saw the sign first. Liar. Black paint. Large letters, legible from the road. Then he registered the woman tied to it. He pulled button to a stop. Not a dramatic stop. Not the kind where a horse rears and dust settles in a particular way. Just stopped. Because his hands made the adjustment before his brain had finished processing the instruction. She was tall. Dark hair half escaped from its pins. A pale yellow dress the sun had been working on for hours. Her wrists behind the post, her chin level, and her eyes fixed on the man standing in front of her, carrying an expression Jesse could only describe, even later when he was alone in the ranch house trying to put words to what he had seen, as controlled fury. The way a fire stays inside its ring. Not because it wants to, because it has no other choice at this particular moment. And it knows it. And it is choosing to use the constraint rather than be destroyed by it. The man in front of her was Rupert Crane. Jesse knew Rupert Crane. He had had 2 conversations with the man over mortgage matters in the past year. Both had left a feeling on his hands afterward, the specific feeling of having touched something that looked clean and wasn't, and of not being able to quite locate the contamination even, though you were certain it was there. He looked at the courthouse steps. Devlin Marsh stood with a small cluster of men watching. Marsh caught Jesse's eye and immediately looked at the ground. Jesse looked back at the woman at the post. She still hadn't looked at him. She was holding on to whatever she was holding on to, that fixed point past Rupert, that private anchor, with the focused determination of someone who has decided exactly what she will and will not spend her attention on and is not going to be moved from that decision. He sat on button for a moment. The honest truth, the truth he would not fully admit to himself until much later, in the dark of the ranch house, in a room that still smelled faintly of cedar, was that he hesitated. He felt the weight of what Crane held over Iron Creek Ranch settle across his shoulders like a yoke. 14 months of mortgage payments remaining. The land Clara had loved the way some people love breathing. Not poetically, not with speeches about sunsets, but with the practical animal certainty of a person who knows that, without this specific thing, there is simply no remaining. Crane could call that note in 48 hours. Jesse knew this. He knew it the way he knew the fence lines and the water table and the direction of the winter wind. Not from thinking about it, from living with it. He looked at the woman at the post again, and then something arrived. Uninvited. The way it always arrived, usually at night when he was tired enough that the defenses ran slow. A name. Reuben Taft. 1881. 5 years ago. But closer than that in the way that certain things stay close regardless of calendar distance. A man Jesse had never met before that case. 32 years old. Black man. A family in Wichita, wife, 3 children. He had been sending money to them every month for 6 years, without missing one. Accused of stealing horses from a ranch outside Dodge City. Jesse had been a federal investigator then. 3 years into the work. Good at it. He had a reputation for being careful and thorough, for finding the things that weren't immediately visible. He had found them in the Taft case, too. A witness account that didn't match the timeline by 40 minutes. A brand inconsistency suggesting the horses had been moved before Reuben Taft was anywhere near the property. A financial record pointing toward the ranch foreman as the actual thief, a man who had a gambling debt and access that Taft had never possessed. A motive that Taft had never had. Jesse had brought this to his supervisor. His supervisor had looked at the evidence for a long time. Then he had said quietly, in the tone of a man explaining something to someone who needed to understand how the world actually worked rather than how it was supposed to work, that the county prosecutor had already made commitments, that the case had been built in a particular direction, that introducing contradictory evidence at this stage would complicate things for people above both of them, and that Jesse's career prospects would benefit significantly from understanding that complication as something to avoid rather than something to navigate toward. Jesse had gone home that night, sat in his kitchen for 3 hours, and made himself the worst bargain a man can make with himself. He told himself it wasn't his decision anymore, that he had done his part by finding the evidence, that the system would correct itself eventually, that someone else would find the same things eventually. Reuben Taft was convicted, sentenced to 4 years. He died in the prison at Lansing, Kansas, in March of 1882. Pneumonia. The winter had been particularly bad that year. His wife learned about it from a letter the prison sent to the last address on file, which was the boarding house where Taft had been living before his arrest, and which had had 3 different occupants in the intervening time. The letter sat for 11 days before someone forwarded it. Jesse had resigned the following month. He told Clara it was burnout. She believed him because she trusted him, and because there was no reason not to, and because the thing he had actually done and failed to do was exactly the kind of thing that doesn't show on a face if you've had enough time to arrange the features properly before anyone looks. He bought Iron Creek Ranch, learned the work, and spent 4 years learning that there is no amount of fence fixing or cattle tending that gets rid of a specific name if that name has decided to stay. Reuben Taft. He looked at the woman tied to the post. He looked at the courthouse steps, where Devlin Marsh was studying the packed dirt of the road. He looked at Rupert Crane's silver watch chain catching the morning sun, with its cheerful, offensive persistence. And something moved in his chest. Not righteousness. He had no confidence in his own righteousness and hadn't for years. Not heroism. He was 32 years old, and tired and had 14 months of mortgage payments left on land he had bought to atone for something he had never told anyone about. Just 2 words, arriving in his chest like something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment to be said. Not again. He stepped down from Button. He didn't announce himself, didn't call across the street, didn't give Rupert Crane or Devlin Marsh or any of the people watching from doorways the time to prepare a response. He just walked across the packed dirt of the main street, past the wagon ruts, past the water trough, past the particular careful attention of 30 people who had been watching something all morning and were now watching something different. Rupert heard the footsteps when Jesse was about 15 feet away, turned. Not afraid yet, just surprised, the specific surprise of a man who has arranged a room a particular way and someone has walked in and moved the furniture without consulting him. Rupert's mouth forming the word, Cord, which was interesting because Jesse's name was not Cord. Jesse's name was Jesse Cord. Cord was his surname. But Rupert had said it the way you say a first name, which meant he had confused Jesse with someone else. A rancher on the South Road, probably similar build, similar horse, someone Rupert had spoken to at some point over a mortgage matter and filed away under the wrong label. The confusion said something specific about how much attention Rupert paid to the individual people whose lives his family system controlled. Not enough to distinguish one gray horse from another. Not enough to remember which man held which debt. The woman at the post heard it. Jesse walked past Rupert Crane the way you walk past a fence post. Not around him, past him, close enough to make the point without requiring an explanation. He stepped around to the back of the shame post and pulled the knife from his belt. An old knife, a working tool, the handle worn down to the specific shape of his grip after years of daily use, leather, wire, the wrong ends of situations. Nothing ceremonial about it. Nothing dramatic. He cut the rope. Kaya made a sound when the tension released. Not a cry. Not anything that could be described as breaking. Just an exhale, single, involuntary. The sound a structure makes when the pressure holding it in place is suddenly removed, and the structure has to remember how to simply be itself again. She stepped away from the post. Her wrists came around in front of her slowly. She pressed them against her stomach, already knowing without looking that the left one had been cut by the rope. She turned and looked at the man who had cut it, older than she had thought from a distance, a face that had been through weather without apologizing for it. Gray beginning at the temples, eyes the specific color of creek water in November, not warm, but clear, direct. His voice, quiet and direct. "Ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. Then, "Thank you." Even voice. It cost her something to keep it even. She could feel the cost in her throat. He could see it around the edges of the word, but she made it even anyway because she had decided to. Devlin Marsh came down the courthouse steps with the practiced urgency of a man who has been watching something he should have stopped earlier, and is now highly motivated to appear decisive. One hand on his belt. The walk of authority. You just cut a court-ordered restraint. That's obstruction of justice. Judge Crane will have your mortgage note called by nightfall. You understand that? He will take Iron Creek Ranch from you before the sun goes down. Jesse turned to look at him. He had known Devlin Marsh 11 years. Had attended the man's wedding, a small affair in the spring of 1879. He had watched Marsh sand himself down over 4 years slowly the way erosion works, no single day you could point to and say that was the day it changed. Just the gradual wearing away of the edges until the shape of the original thing was no longer quite recognizable. Jesse's voice, steady and clear. Then he can come and take it from a man who's still standing. The street went quiet, not the natural quiet of an empty place. The electric, held-breath quiet of 30 people choosing the same thing at the same time without coordinating. Choosing to be still, to listen, to let this moment exist without interrupting it. Jesse turned back to Kaya. Can you walk? Her chin was still level. Yes. My horse is at the end of the street. Then I can walk to the end of the street. No drama in it. The voice of a woman who has decided to be exactly as capable as she is and not perform any excess in either direction. They walked together. Jesse did not take her arm. She hadn't asked for that, and he was not in the business of offering what hadn't been requested. He walked beside her, one pace off her left shoulder, close enough to catch her if her legs decided they were done, far enough to leave her the dignity of her own weight carrying itself. Behind them, Rupert Crane called something out. Neither of them turned. At the horse, Jesse helped her into the saddle. She needed it. Her arms had less in them than she would have admitted, and the morning had been longer than it looked from the outside. He swung up behind her and turned button north, away from the sign, away from the post, away from the 30 people in Stone Falls, Kansas who had stood on a main street in July and found other things to look at. The town sat in its dust, and its practiced looking away behind them. The painted sign still readable from the road. Liar. But the woman it had been built to break was already gone. And in 30 doorways behind 30 sets of eyes that had found other things to look at all morning, something shifted. Not courage. Not yet. The precursor to it. The faint, dangerous thing that lives in the moment just before a person decides they are finished being afraid. The thing that starts when one person stops. Just one person walking across a street. Just one rope cut. In the office behind the courthouse, where the good lamps burned on imported oil, and the ledgers lived behind a locked door, Judge Aldous Crane stood at the window for a long time, after the gray horse turned north. Then he sat back down at his desk. His voice, when he finally spoke to Rupert, was very quiet, the specific quiet of a man who has not been seriously challenged in a very long time, and is only now beginning to take accurate measurements of what he is dealing with. Find out who she's spoken to. Find out what she thinks she has. Rupert, already picturing the outcome, already seeing the end of this the way he always saw ends. Quickly, in his favor, and with minimal inconvenience to himself. And then, Crane's eyes returned to the window, to the empty post in the center of the square. And then I want that ranch. Neither of them considered, even briefly, that by the time Crane finished speaking, the woman they were discussing was already doing calculations on horseback. That she had a list of names in her memory, arranged in order of usefulness. That she had spent 3 months learning the exact shape of the system she was about to dismantle. And that she had not wasted a single one of those months. They were a quarter-mile north of town, before either of them spoke. Button's hooves on the packed earth. The dry grass on both sides of the road moving in a hot wind, that wasn't doing anything useful about the temperature, but was at least in motion. The distance behind them looked deceptive in the heat haze. Further than it was, or closer, depending on where you looked. The kind of heat that makes you think you're further along than you are. Kaya's voice came, without preamble, without softening. I didn't steal anything. Jesse's answer, just as direct. I know. She turned her head slightly. Not all the way, not enough to look at him directly. just enough to catch the edge of his face in her peripheral vision. "You don't know me." "No." His eyes stayed on the road ahead. "But I know what a person looks like when they've been caught doing something wrong. And I know what a person looks like when the world has decided to let them burn. Those are different faces." She was quiet for a moment, processing this, filing it. Then, "Crane's nephew forged the land deeds. His name is Rupert. I found documents in Judge Crane's desk drawer while I was cleaning the offices. Property transfers that hadn't happened. Names I recognized, farming families, people who still believe they own their own land. A pause, deliberate, the kind that carries weight. And a signature on one of them from a man who died in 1883. Jessie's hands adjusted on Button's reins, without him thinking about it. Thomas Whitfield. She turned her head further. A full quarter turn now. "You knew him?" "Knew of him. He had the parcel east of the Henderson place. Died that fall." Jessie's voice measured, careful. "They said fever." She repeated it, not a question. Just 2 words, placed back into the air with extra weight. "They said." A silence with something in it. The kind of silence that isn't empty. "How many deeds did you see?" Jessie asked. Too clearly, before Rupert came back into the office. There were more in the drawer. I couldn't read all the names. I was moving fast. She pressed her right hand against her knee, an unconscious gesture, checking the left wrist, without looking at it directly. Within 2 days of him finding me there, the story became that I had stolen the office payroll and was spreading slander about his family. Judge Crane signed the complaint himself. He painted the sign himself. A beat. The woman at the boarding house told me. She watched from her window. Jessie said nothing for a moment. The ranch was visible now, a mile further north, the roof of the main house catching sun, the fence line of the south pasture a thin dark thread against the dry grass. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he might be seeing for the last time, then deliberately moved his eyes back to the road. "Crane holds my mortgage," he said. "I assumed. He can call it everything. I know. I'm not telling you that so you'll feel guilty about what you did back there." Her voice carried something dry in it. Not bitterness, something more controlled than bitterness. "I'm telling you so you understand the full shape of what you're standing inside." Jessie almost said something. Stopped. Recalibrated. "Are you asking me to fight your battle?" "I'm asking to be somewhere. That isn't that post, while I figure out how to fight it myself." She turned forward again, eyes on the road. "I am not in the habit of asking for more than what I need." He looked at the back of her head, the dark hair, the sunburn developing across the back of her neck. That was going to hurt considerably by morning. The pins that had lost their hold hours ago, and were now doing their best with what remained. "Iron Creek Ranch," he said. "4 miles north." "All right. It's not much," he said. And then, because comfort without accuracy wasn't something he had patience for, "Hasn't been much for a while. Does it have a roof?" "It does." "Then it's already more than I had an hour ago," she said. And that was the end of the conversation because neither of them was the kind of person who kept talking past the point where the necessary things had been said. Iron Creek Ranch was exactly what he had described. Functional. Maintain the way you maintain something, when maintenance is the only form of control you have left. She understood this immediately, recognized it the way you recognize a specific kind of grief in a stranger's posture, before anyone has said a word. A place where something used to live that doesn't live there anymore. She didn't say anything about it. Inside, Jessie set a basin of water on the kitchen table. Found a cloth. Located a tin of wound salve on the shelf above the stove, and set it down beside the cloth without ceremony. His voice, matter of fact, left wrist. "I can manage. Sit down anyway." She sat. She cleaned the rope burn herself, methodically without reacting to the sting, which told Jessie more about her history than anything she had said on the ride north. You only stop reacting to pain like that by spending a long time practicing. He went to the other side of the kitchen. Dried beef, biscuits from that morning. He named what he had without apology. Then, I'll need to ride to Harper's Crossing for supplies. Crane hasn't reached that far yet. He paused, reorganizing the sentence in his head, which may be a complicated proposition for a while. Because of me. Because of Crane, she said. Leave that where it belongs. She pressed the cloth against her wrist, held it, looked at the surface of the kitchen table, the grain of the wood, the rings left by years of cups set down by hands that were no longer setting cups down. Her eyes moved to the hallway. Whose room is that? The one at the end, with the blue curtains visible through the partly open door. Jesse went still for exactly 1 beat, kept his hands moving on the food. My wife's. She died 2 winters ago. I'm sorry. So am I, simply said, without performance. The way a man says a true thing he's had enough time to stop arguing with. You can use it. Curtains are clean. There's a proper bed. She nodded once. She ate when he put food in front of her. Slowly at first, then with the focused efficiency of a body that has been running on empty and has just been given permission to stop. Jesse ate standing at the counter, which she noticed and understood without requiring explanation. He was a man who had stopped setting 2 places at the table and hadn't found a reason to start again. When she finished, she folded the cloth neatly beside the basin. I need to be clear about something. Jesse waited. I'm not here to hide. Her voice carried a specific quality now, not raised, not hard, but with the kind of clarity that means every word is being placed deliberately. I understand this might look like a woman running to the first safe place she found, but that is not what this is. I was shamed in public for telling the truth. I intend to be cleared in public for the same reason. I am not going to sit quietly somewhere and be grateful until this resolves itself. It won't resolve itself, Jesse said. No, Crane will make certain of that. She met his eyes directly across the kitchen. I didn't cut you loose, so you'd be quiet, Jesse said. Something moved in her face, not softening exactly, more like the recognition of something that was already there and was only now being acknowledged. Then we understand each other, she said. She slept 14 hours. Jesse knew because he checked the house twice in the night. Not hovering, just the way a man checks on anything wounded that has come into his care. Quick pass, confirm its breathing, leave it alone. Both times the ranch was silent, the blue curtains still. He found her in the kitchen at first light. Already dressed, moving with quiet, deliberate purpose, opening cupboard doors, closing them, making some kind of internal accounting. Without turning, You're out of salt. He stopped in the doorway. I know. And cornmeal. You have enough preserved goods for roughly a week eating alone. She turned then. The sunburn across her nose had deepened overnight. Her eyes were clear and direct in a way that said the 14 hours had done what they needed to do. I'll need to look at your ledgers. Jesse pulled out a chair. She was already reaching for the stack of account books on the shelf beside the window. 3 of them, oldest to newest, organized in the way of someone who keeps records because they understand that records are a form of memory you can argue with. She set them on the table and opened the first one. Had a piece of charcoal from the shelf near the stove in her hand. Began to read. He made coffee. Set a cup in front of her without asking. She drank it without looking up. 20 minutes passed. Jesse drank his own coffee at the counter. Watched her work and said nothing because interrupting someone who is reading something with that kind of focus is like interrupting someone who is diffusing something. The risks outweigh whatever you were about to say. Then she looked up, set the charcoal down, tapped a line near the bottom of a page in the second ledger. This fee, administrative processing charge, $12. 8 months ago. Do you remember agreeing to it? Jesse looked at the number. No. Her finger moved. This one. Drought assessment search charge. $9. 6 months ago. There was no. And this. She turned 2 pages. Her voice stayed level, the voice of someone presenting facts, just facts, the facts themselves doing the work she doesn't need to do for them. Late payment penalty. $7. For a payment that, according to your own entry here, She touched the corresponding line in the third ledger. Was received 4 days before the due date. Jesse sat back in his chair. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way of two people looking at the same true thing at the same moment, and neither quite ready to say the word for what they are both seeing. Jesse's voice came slowly, each word arriving separately. He's been adding to the balance, small enough that each one looks like an error, or a fee you forgot agreeing to, or something too minor to challenge because who disputes $9 when they owe $200? She closed the ledger. $28 in 8 months. That is not a mistake. That is a method. She looked at him across the table. And you are not the only one he is doing it to. Jesse put both hands flat on the table. He processed things physically. She had already understood this about him. The way anger moved through him and then settled. The way he made himself go still when what he actually wanted was to be moving. The deeds I saw, Kaya said. The Henderson family. The Aldridge farm on the North Road. He is doing something worse than the fees, Jesse. Much worse. This was the first time she had used his name. He registered it without showing that he had. Tell me. The families are making mortgage payments every month. On land they no longer own. According to the altered documents, the titles were transferred to a holding company controlled by Crane's office. A company name that means nothing, designed to mean nothing, 3 words and a number. The transfers happened without anyone's knowledge. The families don't know. They continue paying. Crane continues collecting those payments. She paused, while simultaneously holding the deeds through the company. He is receiving money twice for the same land, taking the payments and taking the property at the same time. Jesse stood, walked to the window, looked out at the ranch, the dry troughs, the thin grass, the south pasture fence he still hadn't gotten to. 14 months of payments remaining. $28 in charges that had never been legitimate. And a judge who had watched Jesse ride his convicted woman out of town on horseback yesterday and had been deciding ever since what to do about that. Why tell me this? Jesse's voice was careful. You could have kept it, used it as leverage later. Because you cut the rope. She held his gaze steadily. Because you are already inside this whether you chose to be or not. And because you have the right to understand the full shape of what you're standing in. She paused. $28 in false fees is your evidence. It's not enough alone. But combined with what I know, and with what we can find. Jesse said. She looked at him with the patience of someone who has just said something obvious and is waiting for the listener to catch up. Before he could respond, they heard it. Hooves on the road. Multiple. Moving with purpose. 2 riders came into the yard, without slowing until the horse's breath was audible, through the kitchen window. Jesse came out the front door, before they could dismount. The first rider had a broad face and a flat voice, the look of a man who works for whoever is paying and asks the minimum number of questions compatible with getting paid. Judge Crane wants it known that the woman you removed from lawful court custody remains under a valid sentence. Harboring her constitutes. She's a guest on private property, Jesse said. She's a convicted party who abandoned her sentence. Jesse stepped off the porch into the yard, putting himself level with the horses. Her sentence was tying a woman to a post in 100-degree heat without water. That is not a sentence. That is something else. And we both know the word for it. The second rider, younger, not quite at home in the weight of the errand, shifted in his saddle. The first rider's voice dropped half a register. Judge Crane can call your note. Full balance. 48 hours. I understood that yesterday. The sheriff said it. Jesse held the man's eyes without heat, without theater, just the steady attention of someone who has already made his calculation and is not going to be recalculating. My answer's the same. Tell him this specifically. If any man sets foot on Iron Creek land without an invitation, if my fences get cut, if my cattle get moved, if anything on this property is disturbed in any way, I will ride to the federal land office in Abilene and file a formal complaint about the accounting irregularities in his mortgage records. The first rider's expression did not change, but something shifted behind it. What accounting irregularities? The kind a man finds when he looks at his own ledgers carefully enough, Jesse said. Tell him that, specifically. A pause. The first rider looked past Jesse's shoulder to the doorway, where Kaya had appeared, standing in the frame, arms at her sides. Not retreating, not performing, just present, which was itself a statement. That the woman? The first rider said. That's my guest, Jesse said. The two riders exchanged a look with the compressed efficiency of men who have worked together long enough to have a conversation in a glance. Then the first one turned his horse. Crane won't let this sit. Neither will I, Jesse said. He watched them ride back down the road. When the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded, he turned. Kaya was still in the doorway. You mentioned documentation, she said. I did. Do you have documentation? I have my ledgers, my own testimony, whatever you remember about those deed records. He paused. It's not enough yet, but he doesn't know the exact shape of what we have, and that uncertainty is worth something. Uncertainty makes people move before they're ready. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we need witnesses, people who saw things, people Crane has been holding over something, who have been staying quiet because there was nobody standing next to them when they tried to speak. That is how his system works. Isolation. One person at a time, each one believing they are alone, too afraid to find out if that's true. Jesse looked at her. That's a dangerous thing to ask of people. I know. Her eyes held his. I'm not asking them to be brave for nothing. I'm asking them to be brave for each other. One person's account is a claim. 11 people's accounts are a record. And a record, she said, is something that can go to Abilene. Jesse thought of a name. May Tully, 73 years old. Stone cottage at the end of Mill Road. She had tried to bring water to the post that morning. Crane's man had turned her back, threatened a property tax assessment by sunrise if she came within 10 feet of the post. She had been in Stone Falls longer than Crane had been in the state. She remembered what the town looked like before the system, and she had nothing left for him to threaten. She had stopped being afraid of losing things around the time her husband died, and there is a specific kind of freedom in having already lost the thing you were most afraid to lose. They rode in the next morning, before the heat became an argument against everything. May Tully answered the door before they knocked. Not almost before. Already standing in the open frame, when they came up the path, shawl around her shoulders despite the temperature, brown eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at Kaya the way a person looks at someone they have been expecting for a while and are simply relieved has finally arrived. I watched them take you to that post. No greeting, no softening, just that. I tried to bring you water. Crane's man, the young one with the red vest, told me if I came within 10 feet of you, he'd have my property assessed for back taxes by morning. Her jaw tightened at the memory. I went home and sat with it ever since. I know, Kaya said. I saw you. I saw what they did. This mattered, Kaya saying this. May's eyes showed it. Inside, the cottage was small and ordered and dense, with the weight of a life lived long in one place. May settled into her chair, with the careful deliberation of a woman, whose knees have opinions about stairs. She folded her hands in her lap. Her voice carried the transaction opening quality of someone who has been sitting on information and has decided the sitting is over. What do you need? What you saw, Kaya said. All of it. For seconds of silence. Jesse counted them. Then May spoke. The night the payroll went missing had been a Thursday. She knew because Thursday was her mending night. She had been up late. Lamp oil running low, trying to finish the collar on her good dress before it ran out. She heard a horse. One horse. Moving fast down the back alley behind the courthouse, which ran directly past her side window. She looked out. Gray roan. White marking on the left foreleg. She had seen Rupert Crane's horse enough times in 3 years to identify that animal in complete darkness by the sound of its gait. Not by sight, by sound. The particular rhythm of it. He was moving fast, May said. He was carrying something, and he did not want to be seen. Jesse kept his voice neutral. "How certain are you?" May looked at him the way very old women look at men, who ask questions they find mildly insulting. "I am certain," she said. "What I am not is believed." In this town those are two different things, and the distance between them has been managed very carefully by a man, who controls what gets written down. Kaya leaned forward slightly. "We are building toward a moment where that management ends. We need you willing to say what you just said. In public. When the time comes." The clock on May's shelf ticked 3 times into the silence. "He threatened my cottage," she said. "I have nowhere else to go. If we do this correctly, if the truth comes from enough people at once, rather than one person standing alone, Crane loses the ability to punish anyone individually. He cannot evict everyone. He cannot destroy everyone. His power depends on each person believing they are the only one who sees what is happening." Kaya held the older woman's gaze. "That is what we are taking away from him." May looked at Jesse. "You believe her?" "Yes. You are putting Iron Creek on this." "I already did that when I cut the rope," Jesse said. "I'm not going back." May unfolded her hands, placed them flat on her knees, a decision made physical. "Then, there is one more thing. The cufflink." Kaya went still. "What cufflink?" Jesse said. "Rupert lost a cufflink that week. Silver. Blue stone. He was asking around about it, trying to seem casual, which he is not good at. Every shop, every stable hand. Anyone who might have found something along the back alley." May paused. "The boy found it. Amos Vane. The one who works at the livery stable. I saw him with it 2 days after the payroll went missing. He looked not confused, terrified. Like a person holding something they don't know how to put down." Jesse and Kaya looked at each other. One of those looks that doesn't need words. "Does Amos still have it?" Kaya said. May's voice was careful. "Unless Rupert found out and took it back, which God help that child is possible." The livery stable sat at the south end of Stonefalls, tucked against the back wall of the blacksmith shop. At mid-morning it smelled of horses, and old hay, and the particular oil that gets worked into leather over years of use. One hand visible through the open main doors, forking hay to the loft, with the automatic rhythm of a person, whose body has done this enough times it no longer asks the brain for instructions. Amos Vane was not in the loft. He was in the tack room at the back, 16 years old, sitting on an upturned bucket with a piece of harness leather in his hands, stitching a repair with the focused concentration of someone using a task to avoid thinking about something that lives in the same head as the task. He looked up when Kaya came through the door. His face did 3 things in about 2 seconds. Recognition, then fear, then the specific guilt of someone carrying information they know they should have shared and haven't. Before Kaya said a word, his voice came, "I know why you're here," which was interesting. "Tell me," she said, and sat down on a crate across from him, level with him, not standing over him, level, which changed the geometry of the conversation. Amos slept in the back stall sometimes, when the heat was bad. His room above the feed store didn't get air in summer. That Thursday he had been in the stable. Heard Rupert bring his horse in around 1 in the morning, which was wrong. Rupert didn't ride at night. He didn't like the dark. It made him jumpy. He was moving fast. He took something out of his saddlebag, had it wrapped in a feed cloth, pushed it behind the loose board in the 3rd stall. Amos looked at his hands. "I didn't look at what it was. I didn't want him to know I was there. But in the morning the board had been moved, and whatever was behind it was gone." He reached into the front pocket of his work pants, brought out a small object, set it in his open palm. Silver, blue stone, clean setting, exactly as May had described. "He dropped it in the stall," Amos said. "I picked it up, didn't know what to do with it, so I kept it." A pause. "That was probably stupid." "No." Kaya's voice was direct without being soft. Not comfort designed to manage him, but assessment delivered honestly. "That was careful. That was the right thing even when you didn't know why." From the doorway, Jesse's voice came quiet and level. a man stating a fact and letting its weight sit without decoration. He threatened a 16-year-old boy to stay quiet. Amos closed his fingers around the cufflink. He said if I told anyone what I saw, he'd tell his uncle I'd been stealing from the stable, that no one would believe me over him because of who his family is. He swallowed. He said the judge could send me to the reformatory in Wichita. Kaya held the boy's eyes. We are not asking you to stand up alone. When you speak, there will be enough people standing beside you that Crane cannot reach any single one of us without reaching all of us at once. If he tries, everyone in the square sees exactly what he is. Amos looked at the cufflink in his closed fist, then at Jesse, then back at Kaya. He nodded, the kind of nod that isn't full agreement yet, just the beginning of considering it possible. Keep that cufflink on your person, Jesse said. Not in this stable. Not in your room. On your person. And stay away from Rupert until we tell you it's time. Pearl Sutton ran the laundry operation out of a building 3 lots east of the feed store. She was 38, with the particular economy of movement that comes from years of physical work nobody watches, and nobody thanks you for. She opened her door 4 inches and looked at Kaya, through the gap with the eyes of a woman who has run the same risk calculation so many times that caution has become her resting expression. I know why you're here, she said. Then you know what I'm going to ask, Kaya said. A silence. The door held at exactly 4 inches, as though Pearl had decided precisely how much she was willing to open it, and was prepared to defend that measurement. I know what you're going to ask, and I know what happens to me if Crane finds out I answered. Her voice was low, each word placed before the next like stepping stones over uncertain water. I have a laundry business. It's small. It's mine. Took me 7 years to build it after my husband died. He could pull your water permit, Kaya said. He could claim this property sits on disputed land. He could have the sheriff cite you for violations that didn't exist yesterday and won't exist the day after he's made his point. So you're asking me to hand him the means. I'm asking you to help make sure he never gets to use them. The gap held at 4 inches for 3 full seconds. Then Pearl said, I washed Rupert's coat the morning after the payroll went missing. Kaya waited. Blood on the right cuff. Not a lot, but deliberate, the kind that comes from a cut, not from general wear. Like he had dragged his arm along something sharp in the dark. She stopped. The left sleeve was torn at the elbow, caught on something, a nail or a post corner. From the angle of the tear, she paused. I have washed that man's clothes for 2 years. I know his garments. That was fresh blood when I got it. The morning after. Jesse said, Why didn't you say anything? Because there was no one to say it to. Flat. Without self-pity, just the fact, offered plainly. And because the man I'd be saying it about is the nephew of the man who decides what gets recorded in this county. Her eyes moved to Kaya. You're building something. Yes. How many people? 4, including you. More coming. The door moved. 2 more inches. Come in, Pearl said, and tell me exactly what you're planning. All of it. Gideon Falk was the color of old bread. When Kaya laid out what she knew in the back room of his general store, door closed, mid-morning on a Wednesday with no customers. Old bread. Slightly gray. The color a man goes when something he has been trying not to think about for 3 months is suddenly sitting on a table in front of him in plain light. The morning after the payroll went missing, Rupert Crane had come to the store before 9 o'clock. He had paid for goods, dry staples, nothing unusual, the kind of purchase you make when you are trying to look like someone running an ordinary errand on an ordinary morning. He had paid with gold coins, 3 of them, in specific denominations that did not come from general trade, the kind that end up in payroll envelopes. Falk's voice when he finally spoke was the voice of a man who has been holding something under water and has just let go. I recorded the transaction. I have it in my ledger. I have known, since the day I wrote it down, exactly what those coins were and where they came from. He looked up from the table. I said nothing because he holds my mortgage. Because I calculated the way everyone in this town calculates, that the cost of speaking was higher than the cost of knowing and staying quiet. His hands were flat on the table's surface, pressing slightly, as though the table might drift if he released it. I was wrong about that math. I have been wrong about it for 3 months. Something in Falk's voice shifted, something older than guilt. Something that had been stored in an uncomfortable place, and was grateful for the chance to be set down in the open. I'll write a signed statement, tonight, which was more than Kaya had asked for, which told Jesse something about what 3 months of guilt does to a person when they are finally given somewhere to put it down. That evening they had 5 witnesses: May Tully, Amos Vane, Pearl Sutton, Gideon Falk, and the evidence from Jesse's own ledgers, $28 in false fees, documented in his own handwriting, before Crane had the chance to explain them away. Not enough. Kaya knew it. She sat at the kitchen table at Iron Creek, with the ledgers spread in front of her, and ran the numbers the way she always ran them. Systematically, without sentiment, until the picture they formed was clear. Not enough for a local courthouse, because the local courthouse was Crane's. Enough, maybe, for a federal complaint, if they had original land documents that predated Crane's alterations. Something with an official seal. Something that showed what the record looked like before someone started adjusting it. Jesse was at the window. The lamp on the table threw his shadow long across the kitchen floor. Warren Hobbs. She looked up. Former county recorder. Crane replaced him in the spring of 1884. Lives east of town now, small farm. Crane pushed him out by making the position unworkable. Budget cuts. Questions about his record-keeping. Eventually just appointed his own man. Jesse paused. He told me something once, over a drink in Harper's Crossing, where he felt safe enough to talk. He said a man in his position would be a fool not to keep copies of everything he ever certified. His voice was careful, measured, placing each word like he was placing evidence on a table. He said someday someone was going to need to see what the record said, before Crane's man started revising it. The kitchen went very quiet. If Hobbs has original certified records, Kaya said slowly, each word carrying its own weight, records that predate the alterations, then the forgeries aren't suspected, Jesse said. They're provable. In a federal proceeding. Neither of them spoke. Just looked at each other across the table, across the open ledgers, across the lamp throwing its long shadows. And then the sound came from outside. Not riders. Something lower, faster. Multiple hooves at the pace of urgency, the specific rhythm, that means something has already gone wrong by the time you're hearing it. Jesse was at the door, before Kaya had fully identified the sound. He came back inside 4 seconds later. Jaw set. For words. They're moving the cattle. The south pasture fence had been cut in 2 places. Clean cuts, a tool, not pressure, not an animal or a branch. Deliberate gaps wide enough for animals to move through in numbers. 3 riders on horseback were working the edge of the herd, pushing them south toward the dry ravine along the bottom of the property line. 15 feet down. Onto rock. Not necessarily fatal. Bad enough without the word necessarily. The cattle knew the direction was wrong. That is the thing about cattle being pushed somewhere dangerous, they know. And the sound they make when they know it is a sound that gets into your chest and doesn't leave quickly. Jesse went left because the break on the left side was worse. Kaya went right without asking, without waiting for direction. She had grown up in camps that moved with the seasons, that required every person to understand their role in the whole picture and execute it without being told. She understood livestock movement the way she understood a column of figures, the complete shape of it, where things were flowing, the exact point where the flow needed to be redirected. She got ahead of the right flank and turned them, took everything she had, voice, arms, the full insistence of her body placed between panicked animals and a 15-foot drop onto rock. It was loud and physical and not graceful. One animal caught her left shoulder, with its head on a hard turn, and put her on one knee in the dry grass. She was back on her feet before the knee had time to register what had happened, because there was no time. The flank was still moving, and she was the only thing between it and the ravine edge. Jesse had turned the left flank. The 3 riders pulled up. This was not going the way they had planned. They had come expecting one man managing a push alone in the dark. Not a woman working the other side with the focused, relentless efficiency of someone who has done this before and is not going to stop. The 3rd rider pushed harder on Jesse's side. Jesse moved button directly in front of the other horse. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just there. Immovable, the body language of a man who has decided the outcome and is waiting for the other party to catch up with that fact. The rider pulled up. Jesse looked at him with a steadiness that required no volume. Tell Crane he doesn't have enough men. The 3 of them left, taking their time about it to make it look like their choice. But they left. Jesse found Kaya at the edge of the south field, breathing hard, dress filthy from the knee down, left shoulder held at an angle that said the collision with the cattle had formed an opinion that would express itself more clearly by morning. She was running her fingers along the cut edges of the fence, assessing the damage the way a person assesses something they are already planning to fix. You're bleeding, Jesse said, a cut above her right eyebrow. Head cuts don't need to be deep to commit to the job. She pressed the back of her hand against it, without looking up, from the fence. I'm fine, Kaya. She turned, and in the lantern light, Jesse could see what the steadiness was costing her. Not weakness behind it, but exhaustion. Real exhaustion. 3 days of it. And underneath that, something older. The weight of being a person who has learned to manage everything alone, because the alternative has not consistently been available. He pulled the cloth from his vest pocket, pressed it gently against the cut above her eye. She went still, not flinching, not pulling back, just still. The way a person goes still when they have been managing everything at full tension, and someone does something careful and it catches them off guard. For one moment, just one, the steadiness slipped. What was underneath it was not collapse. It was the face of someone who is very tired and has not been permitted to show it. He held the cloth against the cut until the bleeding slowed. Neither of them moved away. The night air carrying the smell of dry grass and the mineral scent of Kansas earth that hasn't had rain in 3 weeks. She spoke quietly, more deliberate with the words than usual. I am not asking you to fight this for me. I want you to understand that. I know. I am asking to not fight it alone. He stepped back, handed her the cloth. She held it against her own head and looked out at the pasture, the cattle settling now in the dark, the gap in the fence ugly against the failing light, the 3 sets of hoofprints, from Crane's riders already beginning to blur in the dry earth. Halt, Jesse said. Tomorrow morning, early, we go together. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't. He met her eyes directly with the steadiness he had been practicing for years, applied now to something he actually meant. I want to. Something moved in her face. Recognition of something that was already there and only now being acknowledged. She turned back to the fence. We fix this first, she said. Then Hobbs. He almost smiled. After the fence, he agreed. They repaired the gap by lantern light. The rhythm came back without discussion, the specific ease of people who have already learned how the other works and don't need to relearn it. She didn't talk while she worked. Neither did he. But the silence was different now from the silence of the ride north. That silence had been 2 people finding out if they could do this together. This silence was 2 people who already knew. And knowing changed everything about the texture of the quiet. When they finished, Jesse stood back and looked at the repaired fence line. Then at the sky, Kansas in July, turning colors at the edges of the dark, that seemed almost deliberately extravagant for a landscape that had spent the day attempting to kill everything in it. In the spring of 1882, Jesse said, not looking at her, looking at the fence. I bought this land because I needed somewhere to put myself. I needed something to fix that would stay fixed. Something where the result of the day's work was visible at the end of the day. Kaya said nothing. Listening. I didn't know then that there are some things that don't stay fixed no matter how many fence lines you repair. He paused. Reuben Taft didn't stay fixed. He was still there every morning when I woke up. Still there every night. The fences didn't help with that. She looked at the side of his face. What helped? A long silence. The kind that is answering the question even while no words are coming. This, he said finally. And he meant the fence they had just repaired, and the cattle settling in the dark, and the lantern between them, and the woman standing next to him who had spent 4 days building something from nothing, and none of those things separately. All of them together at exactly this moment in this specific July in a Kansas that had run out of mercy weeks ago. She looked back at the fence. We need to be at Hobbs's place before the sun is fully up, she said. I'll have the horses ready at 5. Kaya, Jessie said. She stopped. He's going to move on Amos. When he figures out we've been to Hobbs, he'll know the cufflink is in play. And Amos is the easiest person on our list to get to. She absorbed this. Then after Hobbs, we go back into town. In daylight. She looked at him steadily. We let Crane see us. We let him feel the clock moving against him. Pressure makes people make mistakes. And we tell Amos to go to May Tully's tonight and stay there. In the back office of the Stone Falls courthouse at that same hour, Judge Aldous Crane received word from his rider that Jessie Cord and the Apache woman had been seen on the road east of town, the road that led to Warren Hobbs's farm. He was quiet for a very long time. Then, to Rupert, in the voice of a man who has built something carefully over 4 years and has just felt the first stones shift beneath it. She has Hobbs's records. We don't know that yet. She has them or she's getting them. That is the only road that goes to Hobbs. Crane closed the ledger on his desk. Slowly, with the deliberate care of a man putting something away he may not be opening again. The cufflink. Rupert's expression changed. You told me you found it, Crane said. I looked everywhere. The boy has it. Crane's voice dropped further. The quiet of a man who is measuring precisely the distance between where he is and where he needs to be. Which means she already knows about the boy, and she has been building something, piece by piece, while we assumed she had nothing. He looked at his nephew with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was the look of someone revising an estimate they had been wrong about. Find out what she has. All of it. Before Saturday morning. Neither of them considered even briefly that at Iron Creek Ranch at that exact hour, the woman they were discussing was standing at a repaired fence line in the dark, with lantern light in her hair, already telling the man beside her what came next. Already 3 moves ahead. Already waiting for the day she could prove it. They rode to Warren Hobbs's farm before sunup. Kaya had slept 3 hours. Jessie knew because she was already in the kitchen. Before 4 o'clock, the ledgers open, making notes by the light of the lamp she had left burning, when they came in from the fence. He made coffee without being asked. Set a cup in front of her without comment. She drank it standing, which told him the 3 hours hadn't been enough, and she wasn't going to say so. Hobbs answered the door at first light, with the look of a man who had been awake for a while already. 54 years old. Lean. The careful bearing of a former official, who has spent 2 years being nobody in particular, and hasn't fully decided whether that's a relief or a defeat. He looked at Jessie, then at Kaya, then at the ledgers she was carrying against her chest. Something shifted in his face, the way attention shifts when something you have been waiting for, without knowing exactly what form it would take, finally comes up the front path. His voice, opening wide, "Come in, I'll get the box." The box was a wooden crate stored under the floor of the back room, wrapped in oilcloth. He lifted it out with the careful handling of something stored precisely because it matters, not because you knew when, but because you knew it would. 11 years of county land records. Every transfer, every deed registration, every mortgage filing Warren Hobbs had certified during his tenure as county recorder. Copied carefully before Crane's appointed replacement came in, and began the slow revision of what the official record said. Hobbs spread them on the table. Kaya set her ledgers beside them, open to the pages she had marked. For the next 40 minutes nobody spoke except to ask a question, or confirm a number. She worked through the records the way she worked, through everything, systematically, without hurry, looking for the place where a false entry makes the one mistake it cannot avoid. Because false entries always make one mistake. The date that contradicts the signature. The transfer language that uses legal form without legal habit. The notation that a genuine recorder would never write, because years of practice teach you that the shorthand means something different in proceedings than it looks on paper. She found 6 discrepancies in the first 20 minutes. Hobbs found for more. Her voice, very level, very controlled, carrying the weight of someone who has been right about something for weeks and is only now seeing it confirmed in ink. He started in the spring of 1884. Your replacement was in the office for less than 6 weeks before the first altered transfer appears. She turned a page, then another. Henderson, the Aldridge farm, a parcel on the eastern edge of the county. She stopped, looked up. Mr. Hobbs, these families are making mortgage payments on land they no longer legally own. According to the altered documents, the title's transferred to a holding company controlled by Crane's office. He has been collecting those payments while simultaneously holding the deeds. He is receiving money twice for the same land. Hobbs sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who has suspected something and has just been told it is worse than he suspected. He's stealing the land twice, taking the payments and taking the property. Yes, and that, she set a page down with a quiet precision that made the gesture louder than, if she had slammed it, is a federal crime, multiple counts, which is why I need your records, not copies, originals, with your certification seal, the records that show what this county looked like before his man started making adjustments. Hobbs looked at the crate, Jessie, at the woman across his table, who had spent 4 days building this moment out of rope burns and stolen mornings, and a list of names written in careful handwriting. 11 years of mornings, Hobbs said quietly, the words of a man doing his own accounting, coming in early to certify documents before the day's business started. 11 years of knowing exactly what each signature meant. He paused. Take the originals, every page with my seal, all of it. They were halfway back to Iron Creek when Jessie said, He'll know we went to Hobbs. By tonight. Yes, Kaya said. He'll move on Amos. Which is why we're riding into Stone Falls before we go home. She shifted the crate of records against her saddle. In broad daylight, Jessie looked at her. You want him to see us. I need him to see us. The worst thing we can do right now is disappear and let him think he's contained this. He needs to feel the clock moving against him. Pressure makes people reach. Reaching makes people careless. And Amos needs to know to go to May Tully's tonight and not go back to that stable. She looked at Jessie directly. We go invisible. We let 30 people see us. We let Crane look out his window. They rode into Stone Falls at 9 in the morning. The effect was not dramatic. It was subtler than that and more significant because of it. Jessie felt it. The awareness moving through the town like current through water. The quiet, involuntary adjustment of people who have been watching a situation and are suddenly presented with new information that requires them to recalibrate. Kaya, publicly shamed 4 days ago, convicted by the county judge, tied to the post in the main street while the whole town found other things to look at. Now riding back in, spine straight, chin level, a wooden crate of records across her saddle, and the man who had cut her loose riding beside her. Looking like two people who had somewhere to be and intended to get there. Gideon Falk appeared in his doorway, started to step back, caught himself, stepped forward instead and stayed there. May Tully was at her gate on Mill Road. Gave Kaya one nod, small and precise. Kaya nodded back. The specific communication of two women who understand each other without requiring words. They found Amos behind the feed store, sitting on a water barrel in the building's shadow, doing nothing with the focused determination of someone working very hard to look like they're doing nothing. He looked up when Kaya dismounted and walked to him directly. Go to May Tully's cottage tonight, she said. Quiet, fast. Don't go back to the stable after dark. Amos glanced toward the courthouse building. Rupert was asking about me this morning. The blacksmith's apprentice told me. I know. That's why you're going to Maze. She held his eyes. 3 days. Market day. Can you hold 3 days? Yes, ma'am. She put her hand on his shoulder briefly. Just that. Brief and direct. Good man. Said it the way you say something you actually believe, not the way you say something to make a 16-year-old feel better about being scared. Amos's posture changed. Something in the set of his shoulders redistributed like a weight moved to somewhere more manageable. They were nearly to the north end of the main street when Sheriff Devlin Marsh stepped out of his office. Stood on the boardwalk. Looked at them. For a moment nobody moved. Marsh looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The tiredness of a man who has been making the wrong choices long enough that he can no longer clearly remember what the right ones felt like. He looked at Kaya first. His voice, careful and neutral. Mississippi Judge Crane filed additional charges this morning. Property interference. He's claiming you directed the damage to Deering's fence line 2 nights ago. For damage done by Crane's own men, Jesse said. Which I can document. The cut pattern on that wire was tool-made, not one of my animals. I know, Marsh said, flat. A simple word carrying the specific weight of something admitted rather than argued. I know because I know which men rode south that night, and none of them work for her. He stopped, seemed to be deciding how much of a longer sentence to actually say. I'm telling you so you know what's been filed, not so you can dispute it with me. Kaya looked at him steadily. Then you know he's lying. I know a number of things, Marsh said. I have known a number of things for 2 years that I have not done anything useful with. He paused again, longer this time, working something out in the space between what he wanted to say and what he was willing to say out loud to these 2 people on the street. I am not telling you I'm ready to walk into that courthouse. I am not making any kind of promise. What I am saying is, he stopped. Exhaled. Market day. If there are enough people standing in that square. If the truth comes out in a way he cannot manage, from his steps. Another pause. I know where I should have been standing for the past 2 years. Stand there on market day, Kaya said. That's all I'm asking. Just be there. Marsh looked at Jesse. 11 years between them. A town that had changed around them both, gradually, in amounts too small to feel on any given day, until someone put the total in front of you in a public square. He looked at something that existed in neither of the visible places around him. Somewhere in the distance between who he had been when he came to Stone Falls and who he had quietly become. I'm not making promises, he said. You don't have to, Kaya said. Just don't be somewhere else. That evening, Ruth Aldridge came to Iron Creek from the East Road, moving at the pace of a woman who has made a decision after a long time spent avoiding it and is now committed. She dismounted at the gate, reached into her coat, and produced a folded paper. Inside at the kitchen table, Kaya opened it. A notice. Crane's Courthouse letterhead. 30 days to vacate the Aldridge property. Grounds. Delinquent payment to the new deed holder. A company name that meant nothing. 3 words and a number. Ruth's voice, controlled and trembling at once. Controlled because she had decided to be, trembling because the body keeps its own accounting. He sent this to Martin yesterday. Martin thinks he missed a payment. He went through every record we have trying to find his mistake. Because that is what Martin does when something goes wrong. He looks for his own error first. She stopped. The next words placed carefully. There is no error, is there? No, Kaya said. The land was transferred 2 years ago, without your knowledge. According to the altered records, he has been collecting your payments on land that no longer carries your name in the official ledger. Ruth looked at the paper on the table between them. Then she looked up. The woman who had walked through the door afraid had become, somewhere in the 30 seconds between hearing the confirmation and raising her eyes, something with more structural integrity than fear. Something with edges. What do you need from me? She said. The night before market day, Jesse said a name out loud in the dark of his room. Not to anyone. to the walls, to the particular quality of silence that Iron Creek had developed over 2 years of being a place where someone used to be and wasn't anymore. Reuben Taft. First time in 4 years he had said it where anyone, even the walls, could hear it. Not for forgiveness. He wasn't expecting that. For accuracy. Because some things need to be said out loud before you are qualified to say the things that matter in front of other people. Because you cannot ask for public courage if you are still avoiding private honesty. He lay in the dark and thought about what he was going to say in that square. Not the words exactly, he wasn't a man who prepared speeches. The truth of it. The specific true thing he had been carrying for 4 years and was going to have to set down in front of 30 people and let them look at. He thought about Reuben Taft's wife in Wichita, learning about her husband's death from a letter that had sat in a boarding house for 11 days. He thought about the 3 children. He thought about the money Taft had sent home every month for 6 years without missing one, and about the gap that money had left when it stopped. He thought about himself, 27 years old in that kitchen in 1881, sitting for 3 hours, making the worst bargain a man can make with himself, and then getting up the next morning and making it again. And the morning after that. And every morning for a year until he resigned and came here and learned to fix fences. The fences hadn't fixed the bargain. He knew that now with a clarity he hadn't had access to 4 years ago. But tomorrow might begin to. Kaya was in the kitchen before 4. Jessie heard the lamp, made coffee, set it in front of her. She was sitting still, hands in her lap, not reviewing the records. She knew the records. She was somewhere else, looking at the table with the expression of someone who has traveled a long distance and has not yet fully arrived. Jessie sat down across from her, didn't ask. After a moment, her voice came quiet. I keep thinking about the post, not the pain of it, the looking away. 30 people who walked past and found other things to see. She paused. I understand why each of them did it. I know exactly what Crane held over each one of them. But there is something about being looked past, looked through like you are not fully there, that goes somewhere inside you that doesn't heal at the same rate as the skin. Jessie said, I see you. She looked up. Saw you from Button before I stepped down. You were memorizing faces. His voice held no decoration, just the fact of what he had observed. A woman who has given up doesn't memorize faces. A woman who is planning memorizes faces. I thought, whatever this is, whoever she is already 3 moves ahead of the man who put her there. Something moved in her expression. The specific movement of a person who has been operating alone for a long time and has just been accurately seen by someone who wasn't looking to diminish what they saw. When this is over, she said, not a complete sentence. The beginning of one, left open deliberately in a kitchen at 4 in the morning with market day 4 hours away. When this is over, Jessie agreed. She looked back at the records, straightened the top page. We need to be in that square before 8, before he positions himself on the courthouse steps. I'll have the horses ready at 7. Cord. He stopped. She was looking at the table, not at him. Thank you. Not for the rope. For not making me smaller than I am. He looked at her for a long moment across the lamp and the open records and the kitchen that had been learning slowly what it felt like to have 2 people in it again. That was never going to be something I did, he said, and went to get the horses. Market day. Every road leading into Stone Falls carried wagons. The baker's cart. Cattle pens at the north end. Children running the patterns children run when they have been confined for an hour and their legs have formed strong opinions. Merchants laying goods on blankets. The smell of bread from 2 blocks out. Stone Falls alive in the specific way it was alive 1 day a month. Fully, loudly, with every person, from 20 miles in every direction present in the same place at the same time. Kaya wore the pale yellow dress. Washed, mended at the hem where the post rope had caught it. The same dress, because she was not going to let a dress tell the story of a bad week, if she could help it, and because walking back into that square in the same dress she had been shamed in was not defeat. It was a statement about who had actually lost something that Tuesday morning. Crane was already on the courthouse steps when they rode in. Of course he was. He had chosen the position deliberately, elevated, the building's authority behind him, the square arranged in front of him the way he had arranged it for 4 years. His town, his square. His certainty that he could manage this the way he had managed everything. He saw them enter. His expression did something very small and very controlled. Not fear, not yet. The micro-adjustment of a man who has been running one version of events in his head and has just received information that requires revision. Rupert stood to his right. Rupert saw Kaya and looked away immediately, which was its own kind of answer to questions nobody had asked out loud yet. They dismounted at the west hitching post. Walked in. The crowd noise dropped as they moved through it. Not to silence, just dropped the way a room drops when something important enters before anyone has agreed on what the important thing is. Crane raised his voice when they were halfway across. The woman walking through this square is in violation of a lawful court sentence. Her presence here constitutes. Kaya's voice came clear and level, not raised, not performing. I am here. The crowd noise dropped the rest of the way. Real silence now. I am here because the truth I was punished for telling needs to be said in the same place I was punished for it. In front of the same people. She reached into the satchel she carried. Brought out the cufflink. Silver. Blue stone. Held it up. Morning light catching the stone at an angle that made it unmistakable from 20 feet. This belongs to Rupert Crane. He dropped it in the livery stable the night the office payroll went missing. The boy who found it will tell you so himself. Amos Vane stepped out of the crowd near the feed store. 16 years old. Clean shirt. Shoulders set in the way shoulders set when a person has decided to do something and has stopped negotiating with their own knees about it. His voice cracked on the first word. Only the first. I was there. Steady after the first word. Finding its footing. I sleep in the back stall when the heat gets bad. I heard Rupert bring his horse in at 1 in the morning. He doesn't ride at night. He doesn't like the dark. It makes him jumpy. He was moving fast. He took something from his saddlebag, wrapped it in a feed cloth, hid it behind the loose board in the third stall. He opened his hand. The cufflink caught the light. He told me he'd send me to the reformatory in Wichita if I said anything. I was scared. A pause. The pause of someone who has just heard themselves say something out loud for the first time and is discovering they don't regret saying it. I'm not scared anymore. The square held its breath. Crane's voice, practiced authority behind it, years of it. This boy is a stable hand making accusations against. Pearl Sutton. Kaya's voice, even and clear. Pearl stepped out, quieter than Amos, but steady. I washed Rupert Crane's coat the morning after the payroll went missing. Blood on the right cuff. Fresh. The left sleeve was torn at the elbow, caught on something in the dark, a nail or a post edge. From the angle of the tear, the person wearing it was moving fast and couldn't see clearly. Her eyes went directly to Rupert. I have washed that man's clothes for 2 years. I know every garment. That was his coat, and that blood was fresh when I received it. May was already at the front of the crowd. Of course she was. She had moved there sometime in the past few minutes, quietly without drawing attention, the way old women, who have been paying attention their entire lives, tend to arrive exactly where they need to be before anyone realizes they have moved. Shawl on despite the heat. Back straight. 73 years old, and not using a single one of them as an excuse for anything. I live on the alley behind the courthouse, May said. That alley runs past my side window. The night the payroll went missing was a Thursday. I was up late mending night. I heard a horse moving fast down that alley at 1 in the morning. She looked at Rupert without hurry, without theater. I know that horse. Gray roan. White marking on the left foreleg. I have seen that animal enough times in 3 years to identify it in complete darkness by the rhythm of its gait. She paused. He was carrying something. He was moving fast. He did not want to be seen. Crane's voice had changed register. Still controlled, still authoritative, but thinning at the edges now, the way a rope thins when too many things are pulling against it from different directions. These are individuals with personal grievances against this court. This is a coordinated Warren Hobbs. This one landed differently. Not because the crowd didn't know the others. They knew Pearl. They knew May. They bought goods from Fox store and watched Amos work the livery. But they knew Warren Hobbs as the man who had been county recorder for 11 years. Who had certified every legal document in this county for over a decade. Who had been replaced quietly and inexplicably in the spring of 1884. Hobbs came out of the crowd carrying the crate, set it on the nearest market table, opened it. 11 years of original certified county land records, he said. Every transfer, every deed registration, every mortgage filing I certified during my tenure. I am asking anyone in this square to compare what is in this crate with what is currently registered in the county recorder's office. He looked at the crowd, not at Crane, at the people who had been living in the county this whole time. The Henderson property, the Aldridge farm on the North Road, the Pruitt family land near the creek, the Reed family acreage, a 40-acre parcel on the eastern edge registered to a family named Running Bear. All of these appear in the current county records as transferred to a holding company. None of these transfers appear in the original certified documents I am holding in this crate. All of them were made after Judge Crane replaced me with his own appointed recorder. His eyes moved, finally, to Crane. The look of a man who has been waiting 2 years to say something and is choosing now to say it simply rather than dramatically. The families whose land was transferred are still making monthly mortgage payments. They do not know the transfers occurred. They believe they are buying land they already lost. The crowd had gone absolutely still. Then Ruth Aldridge's voice came from the middle of it. We received a notice to vacate yesterday. 30 days. Her voice broke on the last word, caught itself, steadied. My husband spent last evening going through every record we have, trying to find the payment he must have missed, because that is what Martin does. He looks for his own mistake first. She was looking at Crane directly now, looking at him the way a woman looks at a man who has been stealing from her family for 2 years, while her husband blamed himself. He did not make a mistake. He was robbed, while he was working that land every day believing it was his. Something moved through the crowd then. Not a sound, a physical thing. The collective shift of people who have been carrying one version of a story and are suddenly given a different one in public, in daylight, with evidence on a market table in front of them, and are recognizing it as true. Jesse stepped forward. The crowd gave him room the way crowds give room to something that has decided to move. He had a paper in his hand. He held it up. $28 in false fees added to my mortgage balance. Over 8 months. Administrative processing charges I never agreed to. A drought assessment I was never informed of. A late payment penalty on a payment my own records show was received 4 days early. He looked at the crowd, at the faces of people he had been buying supplies from, selling cattle near, living adjacent to for 4 years. None of these fees appear in my original mortgage agreement. Every one was added without my knowledge, without any legitimate basis. He paused. I would like to know how many people in this square have seen charges appear on their accounts that they didn't recognize and don't remember agreeing to. He handed the paper to a rancher standing at the edge of the crowd. The rancher looked at it, looked up, passed it to the woman beside him. She passed it on. The silence held for 4 seconds. Then a woman near the back. We have one of those. Processing fee. Last spring. I thought I'd forgotten what it was for. Then a man by the feed store. I got a drought assessment in February. Nobody told me what it covered. Then another voice. And another. And then they were all going at once, low and urgent and overlapping, the sound of 30 people comparing notes they didn't know they all had. Not shouting. Talking. The specific sound of a dam breaking not at one point, but at every point simultaneously. The sound of people discovering that the thing they had each been carrying alone, believing themselves uniquely burdened by, had been shared this whole time. Crane stepped down from the courthouse steps. Slowly, deliberately, the controlled movement of a man who still believes, even now, that he can manage this. Because rooms like this one are familiar to him, because he has managed rooms before. His voice, carrying the weight of 4 years of practice. Every person speaking in this square has a personal grievance against this court. This is a coordinated attempt to discredit. Then Rupert spoke. Not loudly, conversationally, with the specific flatness of a man who has just finished running a calculation and is reporting the result. The payroll is in the judge's office, under the floor, loose board below the left window. The square went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Rupert was not looking at Crane. He was not performing remorse. He was not performing anything. He was looking at a point in the middle distance with the expression of someone who has just decided that the best available option is the one that costs him the least and has moved to it without ceremony. He moved it from the stable when he found out she had been in the building. He wrote the original complaint against her, her name on it, my handwriting, but he wrote it. He told me what to say and I said it. He paused, then finally looked at his uncle. You told me she was nobody, that no one would believe a cleaning woman over a judge, that this was how it worked, that it had always worked this way. A silence. That was not a pause, but a punctuation mark. I believed you, because I always believed you, because I didn't know how to think without using your conclusions. The square was so still you could hear the bread cart's horse shift its weight 40 feet away. Jesse stepped to the center of the open space. Not toward Crane, not toward Rupert, to the center where everyone could see him, where there was no question about who was speaking or why. I need to tell you about a man named Reuben Taft. Nobody in that square knew that name. Most of them, some of the older men maybe, but they listened, because Jesse Cord was not a man who made speeches, and the absence of that habit made people pay attention when he spoke. 1881. I was a federal investigator working a horse theft case outside Dodge City. A man named Reuben Taft had been accused. He had a family in Wichita. He had been sending money to them every month for 6 years, without missing one. He let the square stay quiet around the words. Let them settle. I found evidence that cleared him in the second week. Witness accounts that didn't match the timeline. Financial records pointing to the actual thief, the ranch foreman, a man with access and debt and a motive that Reuben Taft had never possessed. He stopped. Let the pause do work. I brought the evidence to my supervisor. He told me the case had been built in a particular direction. That introducing what I had found would complicate things for people above both of us. That my career would benefit from understanding that complication as something to avoid. Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that is honest about how much it is carrying. I went home that night and made myself the worst bargain a man can make. I told myself it wasn't my decision anymore. That the system would correct itself. That someone else would find the same things. His voice was level. Not confessional in the performed sense. Not seeking absolution from the crowd. Just a man putting the true account of something on record in a place where true accounts were being collected. Reuben Taft was convicted. He died in the prison at Lansing in March of 1882. Pneumonia. The winter was bad. He looked at the faces around him. I left the investigative service the following month. I came here. I learned to fix fences. And I spent 4 years discovering that there is no amount of fence fixing that gets rid of a specific name if that name has decided to stay. He let the square hold what it was holding. I am not standing here today because I am a better man than I was then. I am standing here because I am tired of being the man who knows and says nothing. And because there is a woman standing in this square who spent 4 days building something true, brick by brick, person by person, while most of us waited to see which direction the wind was going. He paused. She did not wait. She has never waited. And I would rather stand on something she built, imperfect as I am, than watch from the side again and spend the rest of my life remembering it. Nobody moved. For a long moment nobody moved, and nobody spoke. The market square of Stone Falls held 30-odd people in the specific silence, that comes after a true thing has been said in front of witnesses. Not comfortable silence. The silence of people recognizing something in themselves they had not planned to recognize on a Saturday morning. Then Kaya spoke. From where she stood in the center of the square, the crate of records at her feet, the morning sun fully, over the courthouse now, and showing everything in plain light. I was somebody. Her voice clear, even, carrying. Before any of you believed me, I was somebody. When I was tied to that post, I was somebody. When 30 people walked past and found other things to look at, I was somebody. When the sign above my head said otherwise, I was somebody. She looked at the faces in front of her. So is every person in this square that he taught you to overlook. So is every person he made you walk past. That is what his system required, your eyes on the ground. Every time you raised them, that is the beginning of the end of it. She looked at Devlin Marsh. Marsh was standing at the edge of the courthouse steps. Had been standing there since they arrived, watching. Not positioning himself. Not moving. Just standing the way a man stands when he is trying to figure out which direction to step and knows that whichever direction he chooses, he will have to live with it. He looked at Crane, at the crate of records, at Amos still holding the cufflink, at Rupert staring at the ground, at the paper moving from hand to hand through the crowd. He looked at Jesse. 11 years. A town. A gradual erosion. The specific accounting of what you lose when you let things go one small compromise at a time and don't look at the total until someone puts it in front of you on market day. Marsh took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. And he walked past Crane, not stopping, not explaining, not performing the decision, just walked. Past the man he had been working for, past the steps he had been standing on, past 4 years of the wrong calculation. He put his hand on Rupert's arm. Come on. Crane's voice came sharp, with the specific authority of a man who has not lost it in 4 years. You work for me. Marsh stopped, turned, looked at Crane with the exhaustion of a man who has just set down something very heavy and is not going to pick it back up. I work for this county, he said. I always should have. He walked Rupert toward the jail. Not fast, not dramatic, just walked. Crane stood on the courthouse steps alone. The crowd around him not closing in, not angry, not violent, just present. The quiet, inexorable pressure of people who have stopped looking away. And for the first time in 4 years, there was nothing behind his position. No fear to rest on. No isolation to exploit. No calculation that still worked because too many people were looking at the same numbers at the same time, and the numbers were refusing to behave. He was smaller. That was the strangest part. What Jesse would remember most clearly afterward, standing in that square, watching Crane on his steps, seeing for the first time what the man actually was. Not a monster, not a force, an ordinary man in a good coat, who had used a position, a system, and other people's fear to make himself appear larger than his actual dimensions. And now that the system was visible, now that everyone in the square was looking at it, from the same angle at the same time, the actual dimensions were all that remained. Crane looked at Kaya, not with the authority of someone about to make a point, with something that had been locked away for a long time and had simply run out of room. I was a good man, he said it simply, into the square, to nobody in particular and everyone at once. When I came to this territory, the county was failing, farms going under, families leaving. I came with legal training and genuine intention. He paused. The first year was honest, almost entirely. The square was very quiet. The first time I changed a number in a ledger, it was to prevent a family from losing their farm in a drought year. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would correct it when the season improved. He stopped. It didn't need correcting because nobody noticed. And I discovered something I did not expect to discover about myself. That the absence of consequences changes a man's relationship with the decision he has made. Not all at once. Slowly, in amounts too small to feel on any given day. He looked at the crowd, not asking anything from them, not performing, reporting. I looked for that day for a long time, I believe it does not exist as a single day. I believe it was 1,000 days. Each one small enough to step over. Each one carrying you a little further from where you started until the distance between where you began and where you are is too great to walk back in a single step. His eyes moved to Kaya one final time. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am saying this because you deserve to understand what I understand, which is that the thing I became does not arrive with a warning. It arrives in the accumulation of small choices that each felt at the time like something other than what they were. He stopped. That is the only true thing I have left to offer, and I did not want to waste it. The square was so still you could hear the bread cart's horse blowing air through its nose from 40 feet away, and then the voices started. Not from one place, from everywhere, low and urgent and building, but different from the voices before. Not just comparing notes. Not just recognizing shared injury. Something warmer. The thing that happens when people who have been alone in something discover all at once that they were never as alone as the system needed them to believe. Kaya moved before the voices had fully started. Jessie watched her work through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who has been planning the next 7 steps, while everyone else was watching the one that just happened. To Falk first signed statement, tonight, everything you told me and everything in that ledger. Falk nodded with the energy of a man whose guilt has just been given somewhere productive to go. Then Pearl. Then May. Martin Aldridge was at the back of the crowd, where Jessie would have expected him, because Martin was a man who showed up to difficult things and stood at the edge until he had worked out what his presence meant. Hat in both hands, turning it the way you turn something when you don't know what else to do with your hands. Ruth said something to him too quiet to hear. Martin's face did something complicated, the specific complexity of a man processing the distance between what he believed was his failure and what had actually been done to him. The difference between those two things is not a small distance. The shift from one to the other is not fast. Jessie watched Martin Aldridge put his arm around his wife. Looked away to give them that. Hobbs appeared at Kaya's shoulder. I need to ride to the federal land office in Abilene. Today. Before his man in the recorder's office has time to. Today, she said. Don't wait for morning. Hobbs looked at her, at the crate in his arms, at the town around him. The town he had left 2 years ago, because he couldn't stomach staying, whose people he had watched being slowly robbed, from a distance, the evidence under his arm, that represented 11 years of careful work, and the reason he had kept all of it without knowing quite when it would matter. He shook Jessie's hand, nodded to Kaya, and moved through the crowd toward the livery, with the purposeful stride of a man who has just been handed permission to do the thing he has been waiting 2 years to do. Amos was still standing where he had been standing when he stepped out, looking at the jail building with an expression that was younger than 16 and older than 40 simultaneously. Kaya walked over. Give it to Marsh, she said. When you're ready. He needs it for the formal filing. Amos opened his hand, looked at the cufflink in his palm one more time, closed his fingers around it. Then, is it done? She looked at him carefully, wanted to give him the clean answer, the simple one, the one that made everything feel finished. Didn't. The hardest part is done. What comes next is paperwork and time. But Rupert is in that jail and your evidence put him there. That is real. That is not going to be undone. A pause. Then Amos. Mrs. Tully said I could stay with her until things settle. That's a good place to be. She makes terrible biscuits. He said it with the specific tone of someone reporting a genuine grievance and being grateful to have something small to report. And Kaya, who had not smiled properly in 5 days, not the kind that reaches all the way, almost did. Tell her I said so, she said, and see how that works out for you. Amos laughed, short and surprised. The laugh of a boy who has forgotten for several weeks that laughing is something he does. He walked toward the jail with his shoulders in a different position than they had been since the whole thing started. Kaya watched him go and felt something settle in her chest. That was not victory. More durable than victory. The specific satisfaction of a thing done correctly, not because it was easy, not because it cost nothing, but because the people who deserved to be standing at the end of it were standing. The formal unraveling took longer than the public moment. That was the thing nobody told you about justice. The moment in the square was only the first sentence. The rest of the document was slower, more administrative, required the kind of sustained attention that doesn't feel like anything. No elevated heartbeat, no crowd, no moment you can point to and say there. Just the patient work of documentation and filing and the careful sequential presentation of evidence to people with the authority to act on it. Kaya had known this before market day. She had factored it into every calculation she made in that kitchen over the past week. Hobbs reached Abilene in 2 days of hard riding, filed the original records with the Federal Land Office before close of business on the second day. A formal review was opened within the week. Crane was arrested 11 days after market day, not by Marsh but by federal marshals who arrived from Abilene with paperwork that his lawyer read 3 times and could not find a credible argument against. Charged with land fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud landholders through the deliberate alteration of county records. Rupert cooperated with the federal investigation in exchange for consideration on his sentence. His cooperation confirmed everything: the payroll theft, the deed alterations, the false mortgage fees across 9 families. And one thing that had not yet been made public, the death of Thomas Whitfield in 1883, had not been fever. It had been arranged to clear the title on his property. Crane was additionally charged with accessory to murder. The man who had told himself in the beginning that he was saving a failing county had, over 4 years, stolen land from 9 families, collected fraudulent mortgage payments, and arranged the death of a man who had been inconveniently in the way. He had not started as a monster. He had become one in amounts too small to feel. That was what Stonefalls took from it in the end. Not the arrests, not the returned land, not even the corrected ledgers, though the corrected ledgers mattered enormously to 9 families, who had been making payments on land they were losing without knowing it. What the town carried forward was the specific and unsettling understanding that it doesn't arrive with a warning. 3 weeks after market day, a letter came to Iron Creek Ranch on Federal Land Office letterhead. 2 pages. Formal language acknowledging receipt of Warren Hobbs's certified records, and the opening of a formal review into all county record alterations made after April 1884, including the unauthorized transfer of a 40-acre parcel registered to a family named Running Bear. Kaya read the letter twice, set it on the kitchen table, sat with her hands in her lap and breathed. Jesse came in from the south pasture and saw her face. "Good news or bad?" he said. She pushed the letter across the table. He read it. Looked up. "You did that. We did that." "No." He set the letter down with a care that matched the care she had given it. "I cut a rope. You built everything that came after it. I want you to be clear about that. Not for my sake, for yours. Because I know what it costs when you look back at something and lose track of who did what. And I don't want you to lose this." She looked at him across the table, across the lamp that had been burning a little later each night, across the kitchen that had been remembering slowly what 2 people in it felt like. "The Henderson land is restored," she said. She said each name with deliberate care, the way you place something where it belongs. "The Aldridges, the Pruitt family, the Reed family, my cousin's 40 acres. She pulled a paper across the table toward him, figures in her careful hand. "Your mortgage, the corrected balance without the false fees. If you sell the east grazing lease through the end of summer and reinvest in cattle numbers by fall, you can make the final payment 12 months ahead of schedule." He looked at the paper, then at her with the expression she had learned to recognize, the one that appeared when he was moved by something and was deciding what portion of that to let show. His voice, direct. "Stay." She looked at him. "Not for the mortgage calculations, though I will not pretend those aren't useful." He held her eyes. "Stay because this table is better with you at it. Stay because this ranch has been a place where I kept things alive without actually living in it, and I am tired, genuinely specifically tired, of knowing the difference between those 2 things and choosing the wrong one. Stay because I'm asking, and because I think you want to, And because we are both old enough and honest enough to stop performing the part where we pretend otherwise. She looked at the letter from the Federal Land Office, at the mortgage calculations in her own handwriting, at the tin cup he had set in front of her when he came in, without asking, just placed the way you place something for a person whose habits you have been paying attention to. You told me to ask you in a month, Jessie said. I said ask me after things settled. I'm asking after things settled. This has been a very concentrated settling. She looked up at him. And for the first time since the Tuesday morning they had tied her to that post, since the rope and the heat and the painted sign and 30 people finding other things to look at, she let the thing she had been keeping carefully managed come all the way to the surface. Not relief, not victory, not happiness exactly. The specific feeling of a person who has been in motion so long, carrying so much for so long, that they had forgotten what it felt like to be somewhere they did not have to manage everything. And is now in this kitchen with this man, and this table, and this lamp, and this cup, remembering what it feels like to be somewhere safe, to be seen without being diminished, to be known without being made smaller. Yes, she said. He was still. Yes, you'll stay, or yes to the other thing? Both, she said. Obviously. They married in October under the cottonwood trees at the north edge of Iron Creek Ranch, where the leaves were coming down in copper and gold, the colors that seem almost deliberately extravagant, after a summer that had spent 3 months attempting to kill everything green. The people who came were the people who had stood in the square. May Tully in her good dress, the one with the collar she had been finishing the night she first heard the truth about Rupert Crane's horse. Amos, taller somehow than he had been in July, standing the way a boy stands when someone has handed him back his own sense of what he is worth. Pearl Sutton, the Aldridges, the Pruitt family, Gideon Falk with the specific look of a man who is doing penance by showing up to things, and is finding to his surprise that it helps. Warren Hobbs had ridden down from Abilene. He shook Jessie's hand for a long time, without saying anything, which was its own kind of speech. Devlin Marsh stood at the back. Did not move closer, which was appropriate. He had done the right thing too late, and he knew it. He was there anyway. Sometimes that is all that remains available to you, and it is still worth doing. Reverend Hollis said the words, the same man who had walked past the shame post looking at the ground, that Tuesday morning, which Kaya had decided was the most honest response in the square. Because he had known he was doing wrong. He had not hidden that from himself. 3 weeks after market day he had come to Iron Creek, and asked if there was anything he could do that would be useful. She had said yes. There is one thing. He had done it. Jessie said his words, without looking away from her face. Kaya said hers and felt them land the way true things land. Not with ceremony, not dramatically, but with the quiet permanent quality of something moving into the correct position, after a long time in the wrong one. Afterward, when the gathering had settled into the yard with food and the warmth of people who have been through something hard together and are still here, May found Kaya near the cottonwood trees. I owe you an apology, May said, for not going to that post anyway. When Crane's man turned me back, I should have sat down on the ground next to you and let them do whatever they were going to do. Because nothing he could have done to me was worse than what I did to myself by walking away. Kaya was quiet for a moment. You tried, she said finally. When most people had already decided not to. It wasn't enough, no. But it was the beginning of enough. And sometimes that is all that one person can give at the moment they are in. She held the older woman's gaze. You came forward when it mattered. You stood in that square. That matters too. Not instead of the other thing. In addition to it. May pressed her hand briefly, moved back toward the gathering. Kaya stood for a moment under the cottonwood trees, leaves coming down around her in copper and gold, the sound of the people she had spent 5 days building something, with filling the afternoon of a ranch that had stopped being empty. Jessie found her there, stood beside her. They both looked south toward the pasture, the repaired fence, the cattle moving in the distance, with the slow, purposeful ease of animals, who have no idea how close they came to losing the ground beneath them. They put up the bench last week, Jessie said. She looked at him. Outside the new schoolhouse. From the post. Martin Aldridge's idea. He said he wanted something that lasted longer than shame. She was quiet. The shame post, 8 feet of painted wood pulled out of the ground on a Saturday morning by 11 men, who hadn't needed to say anything significant about why they were there, turned into a bench outside a schoolhouse door. Place to sit. A place where tired people and small people and people carrying things could rest without anyone asking what they were carrying or why they looked the way they looked. The nail holes are still there, Jesse said. They didn't fill them in. Martin said it was the town's decision, not his, so he left it to whoever sat down. Yes, Kaya said. That's right. He put his hand against the back of her head, gently, the way you touch something you have made a decision about taking care of. She leaned back into it by approximately half an inch, which was enough. Which was everything. You can mean it now, he said. She looked at the south pasture. At the repaired fence. At the ranch that had been kept alive without being lived in, that was figuring out now, slowly, what the difference felt like. I know, she said. That's what I'm thinking about. The autumn light came, through the cottonwood branches, copper and gold, landing on the dry grass of a ranch that had learned, this particular summer, what it meant to be held. And somewhere in Stone Falls, a bench made from an old post of shame sat outside a schoolhouse door, waiting for whoever needed it. With the nail holes left in the wood. Because some things should be remembered, not to keep the wound open, but to know the exact distance traveled, from what was to what is, so that when someone asks how far one person's courage can carry, you have a true answer. Further than fear. Every time. Further than fear. Have you ever walked past something you knew was wrong? Maybe at work. Maybe in your family. Maybe in a community you were part of, watching something happen that shouldn't have been happening, and telling yourself it was complicated, or it wasn't your business, or someone else would handle it, or the cost of speaking was higher than the cost of knowing and staying quiet. Jesse Cord carried Reuben Taft for 4 years, before he got his second chance. Most of us are carrying something like that. A moment we walked past. A time we knew and stayed quiet. A name we don't say out loud. Here is what this story says about that. If you let it say it, you cannot go back and fix what you failed to do. That door is closed. But you can decide clearly, specifically, today, what kind of person shows up when the next moment comes. Not a perfect person. Not a person without a history. The kind of person who, when the moment arrives again, does not keep walking. Crane told the truth about one thing standing alone on those courthouse steps. The thing he became did not arrive with a warning. It arrived in 1,000 small days, each one small enough to step over. And the question that lives in that, the one worth sitting with, is not whether you recognize Crane. It's whether you recognize the small days. The adjustments you've been calling practical. The flexibility you've been telling yourself is temporary. The things you look away from because looking costs more than you want to pay right now. Because that's where it starts. Not in one dramatic decision. In the accumulation of small ones. Each one moving you a little further from where you began, until the distance becomes too great to walk back in a single step. And then there is Kaya. Tied to a post. Middle of town. 100 degrees. A sign above her head calling her a liar. 30 people finding other things to look at. She did not break. Not because she wasn't hurting. She was. But she made a decision somewhere between that boarding house and that post. They were not going to get her face. She chose what she would spend her energy on. She memorized faces. She planned. She waited for one decent person. What she understood, and what she had understood since her mother taught her to read the air currents without sentiment, to use them rather than fight them, was that your response to injustice is the one thing that belongs entirely to you. What you do with what is done to you, that is yours. No one can take it unless you hand it over. And the last thing, 30 people walked past that post. 30 people made the same calculation and came to the same conclusion and found other things to look at. They were not monsters. They were people with mortgages and children and something to lose. They were people who had done what Crane's system required of them. Made themselves small, kept their eyes down, told themselves that one person speaking alone was too expensive. But here is what that actually does. It doesn't keep you safe. Keeps the system safe. The system that is taking from you. Crane's power didn't come from force. It came from each person believing they were the only one who saw what was happening, that no one else would speak, that speaking alone was the only option, and speaking alone cost too much. One man stopped, one rope cut, and in 30 doorways, something shifted. Not courage yet. The thing that comes just before courage. The recognition that you are not as alone in what you see as the system needed you to believe. That's what fear relies on. Your belief that you're the only one. And one act of conscience, one person who decides not to keep walking. That is the first word of a story a whole town eventually learns to tell about itself. A story told in the open belongs to everyone. That is the thing about shame. Cannot survive real daylight. Not the kind where people are standing in it together side by side, refusing to be made small. Tell us in the comments. If you got a second chance at a moment you walked past, what would you do differently? And if you're still waiting for that second chance, maybe you just found it.